Anyway, it's Good Friday. It's always a bit nerve-wracking for a preacher preaching on a special day like Good Friday because services like to be short, and so I want to try and get you home by afternoon tea today. Just kidding. So we want to make it short, so I just want to get straight into the passage today and keep you for as short a time as possible. So let's turn to Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8, and I just want to read just one or two verses from there, and then I might read the extended passage on Sunday because we'll be looking at this passage on Sunday as well. In Romans chapter 8, we're going to focus our attention today on verse 31 and 32. So if you have your Bibles open, I'll read verses 31 and 32. What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? Think about those words in verse 31. God is for us. God is for us. What could match those four words? The God of the universe is for us. Now, we might take that to mean God is on our side. The God of the universe is on our side if you're a believer, and that's certainly true, but it's not just saying that. Plenty of people can be on our side, and in the moment of the crunch time, let us down. My wife also grew up in New Zealand. She grew up on a small 10-acre block, and they used to catch possums. You know, you catch possums in New Zealand, you kill them there, they're a pest. Okay, so not like here in Australia. And we did the same thing on our farm, and we put out a possum cage every day, and to catch possums, and then you know, relocate them to possum heaven. And so on Kathleen's little farm, she was just a little girl, and her dad had a possum trap out. It was a cage, and they caught a possum. And the next morning, Kathleen and her older brother go out, and they see this possum, and her older brother Gavin says, kick the cage, and see what happens. And Kathleen says, no, and he says, no, don't worry, I'm here, I'm with you, I'm for you. And so she kicks the cage, and the possum shoots off, gets out. And her dad sees it, and he's ropeable, because you let a possum go in New Zealand, you've let a pest go. Who knows what you're letting into the country. And so, immediately she does that, her brother's out of there. The brother who just said, I'm for you, I'm on your side, I'm here, don't worry, it'll be okay. And then, all of a sudden, her dad comes running after her with a stick. And so God can be on our side, He can be for us. That's not really what Romans is saying. It's saying more than that. It's saying more that the God of the universe is on our side. It's saying He's for us. We want to explore that. But how can we be sure He's for us? Whatever that means. Non-Christians will say, if God is a loving God, then why does such and such happen? You know, Christians sometimes ask the same question. Often ask the same question, actually. I can think of two instances, two friends of mine who have been in situations, one in an accident that has affected the rest of his life, the rest of his working life, and has said, why has this happened? What have I done? Why has God done this? I can think of another friend just recently, a mutual friend of ours, who I didn't know so well, but knew, who was 23 years old and died of leukemia. Just got married. And my friend rang me up. He went to the funeral and said to me, you know, why are we here? Why does God allow this? If God is so good, if God is so loving, then why this? See, Christians ask the same questions. If God is for us, how can we be sure when these kinds of things happen? Well, the answer is in the next verse, in verse 32. And I always tell my students to look out for the small words in the Bible. And if you're reading the NIV, it's not there, but there's a small word at the beginning of verse 32. and it's the word for. F-O-R. For. For he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. Note that you've got the word for and gave him up together. He gave him up for us all. God gave up his son for us all. Who did he give him up for? Well, we won't go back to Romans chapter 1, but if you go back to Romans chapter 1, Paul, the person who's writing this letter, tells us that he gave him up for sinners. He gave him up for people who exchanged the glory of God for the glory of created things. That's what Romans 1 says. That we all at one time exchanged the glory of God for the glory of created things. In other words, this is what it means. That we looked at God and said, He's not glorious. I can't find happiness in Him. I can't be satisfied in Him. He doesn't do anything for my heart. He doesn't do anything for my affections. He doesn't do anything for my happiness. But money, oh, that's glorious. Or education, oh, that's glorious. Or a career, oh, that's glorious. Or a girlfriend or a boyfriend, oh, that's glorious. Or maybe the number of likes on Facebook, oh, that's glorious. Those things, they can bring me happiness. They can bring me real happiness. Oh, a beautiful newborn baby. Oh, it's so glorious. A family, a wife, a husband. All these things are what satisfies me. God, He can never do that. If you ask a little child, just come out of Sunday school, what sin is, what will they say to you? Doing bad things. Cheating, lying, stealing, murder. And then those little children grow up to be adults. And often you ask an adult what sin is, and they'll say the same things. But that's not how the Bible defines sin. Sin is saying that I find more happiness in created things than I do in God. These created things satisfy me more than God. And also back in Romans 1, exchange the glory of God for the glory of created things. Paul is thinking of Jeremiah chapter 2. And in Jeremiah chapter 2, Jeremiah, with that same verse, goes on to say this about Israel. Because they have exchanged the glory of God for the glory of created things. And Jeremiah says that my people have committed two sins, two evils. So this is what evil is, according to the Bible. They have turned away from the spring of living water and have gone after broken cisterns that hold no water. And so here's the metaphor, is that God is being pictured as a spring of living water. You know, imagine that it's the middle of summer in Queensland. And you're outside, you're working, you're parched, you're thirsty, dying for a drink of water. You feel how dry you're getting. And finally some water comes. And it's a bottle of cool water, and you can just see the condensation on the outside. You can taste it, can't you? And you take off the top and you taste it. Don't like it. Doesn't do anything for you on this hot day. And then you turn to these things called broken cisterns. Now, cisterns in Israel basically are holes in the ground. They're little wells, little concrete wells that were meant to hold water. And they would eventually crack, and so the water would seep out, and what would come in would be dirt and larvae and worms and things like that. Horrible. And here's the analogy. That Israel have tasted real water on this hot day and have spit it out. It tastes gross. And then they have got down on their knees and they have scooped up some of the sludge, the larvae and worms and dirt. Remember, this is the middle of Queensland summer. You're trying to quench your thirst. And they stick that stuff in their mouth. And they go, "Oh, that's glorious! That's what satisfies me." That's what God says that Israel have done. In God's place, they have put, let's just contemporize it, education, money, family, career, boyfriend, girlfriend, relationships, Facebook, you name it. And God says, it's like a broken cistern. All of these things are good, but they will never, ever satisfy. You will never, ever find them to be glorious. You will only find that in me. And so if we come back to Romans, that's who God did not spare his own son for. Those kinds of people. You ever cooked something, meat, and you've served it up, and then someone grabs a bottle of tomato sauce and pours the tomato sauce on it? You ever done that? I make meatballs and plum sauce, and my boys love it. But when I first made it, they all ran for the tomato sauce. How do you think that makes me feel? How does it make you feel when you go to all that effort to make something and then you go and pour tomato sauce over it? It's like what God has done for us. He's created us a good world for us to enjoy, and we've gone and poured tomato sauce all over it, and bowed down to it, seeking our satisfaction in it. That's who God did not spare his own son for. Think about what it cost God to not spare his own son. In other words, to give him up for us. I was adopted. My birth mother, I know her now, she was 16, 17 when she had me. She got in contact with me when I was 21 years old. And we saw each other, wrote letters and things, but she didn't really mean that much to me until I started to have kids. And I remember my first child, sitting with him when he was 2 weeks old. He was on my knee, and I remember looking at him thinking how much I would hate to give him up. And see, my birth mother would tell me, I never wanted to give you up. There wasn't a week that would go by, she said, when I didn't think about you. But my parents said, you either keep him or us. It's your choice. And so she was forced to give me up. And I never understood what a massive thing that was for her until I had kids myself. Until I was able to look into my firstborn's face and think, I can't imagine ever giving him up. And so I sent her an email and told her. First time anyone ever understood, she said. What Paul is saying here, that God did not spare his own son, goes back to Abraham and Isaac. You may remember the story. God tells Abraham to sacrifice his only son. Back in Genesis chapter 22, can you imagine it? Abraham and Isaac are walking up the hill. In the passage as we read it, there's absolute silence for a reason. Because it's meant to be suspenseful. We're meant to imagine what on earth can be going on in Abraham's mind. He waited 25 years to have a son. 25 years. Can you imagine that? And then he finally gets one, and God tells him to sacrifice him. And so the scene in the Bible is that Abraham has this knife, and he's got it, and it's coming down. Can you imagine what must be going on in his mind? And then an angel of the Lord says, "No, stop! Now I know that you trust God. Now I know that you fear God." And it says that Abraham spared his son. But you see, God did not spare his son. God did not spare he sacrificed his son. You know, we make sacrifices all the time. I mean, parents sacrifice for their children. Someone came to me after I had my first son, Luke, and he said to me, "You know, is it a sacrifice being a parent?" I mean, I thought, well, there's a guy who doesn't have kids. He wasn't married, so he just has no idea. I said, no, it's not a sacrifice. I love it. I took 6 weeks off when my firstborn was born. I was doing my PhD in the States, and for 6 weeks I did nothing except look after him. Changed nappies, fed him, did everything. Loved it. But he's my son. Well, it'd be a different story if it was someone else's son. Spouses sacrifice for each other. Yesterday was my 21st wedding anniversary. And last night I was so tired, and Kathleen wanted me to rub her feet, to, get this cream and massage her feet. And I said, "Oh, do I have to?" I was just making my way off to bed. It's 21 years, And I said, "Oh," but I did it. I did it because she's my wife, because I love her, but, she's my wife. Would I do it for anyone else? We make sacrifices for people that we love. But you see, these examples don't even come close to what God has done for us. See, it's one thing to sacrifice for someone that you love, but it's another thing to sacrifice for someone who doesn't even find you glorious, who doesn't love you, who doesn't even thank you. Think about it. What's our reaction to people we've sacrificed for and they don't show any gratitude or thanksgiving? What do we say? We say no more. Oh, not out of unkindness. Just because, if you're not going to return thanks, or if you're not going to do anything with it, then it stops now. I mean, I know churches who operate that way. They hand out to people, and the people aren't thankful or don't do anything with it, then, okay, it stops. We won't waste our time anymore. You see, our love for people is generally like this. We'll sacrifice for those who thank us in return. Or at least do something with our love, our expression of love. Many years ago, when I was a new Christian, I was in a church back in New Zealand, and my best friend at the time, his father, who was an elder in the church, ran off with another woman. They were together for 6 weeks. And then he returned to his wife. And he turns up at church on Sunday night. And the two ladies in front of me, sitting in church, and one turns to the other and says, "I wouldn't take him back." Never forgotten that as a young Christian. I wouldn't take him back. You see, that's generally how we love people. We'll love them if they love us. We'll love them if they show gratitude toward us. It's really difficult to communicate God's love for us, but I'm going to give it a go. Push it a little bit further. Not quite as far as I could, because I pushed it as far as I could once, and I ended up getting told off for it. In a church that I used to be in, I was speaking on Hosea one Sunday. And you know, Hosea he was asked to go and marry a prostitute, someone who was unfaithful to him, and God said, take him back. Take it back. As a way of saying, that's my love for Israel. Even though they've been unfaithful, I will take them back. And so I wanted to kind of work out in my preaching mind how to communicate this to the people. And so I did something that evidently, in hindsight, was rather foolish. I got people to imagine that they had just got home and found out that their spouse had been having an affair. Now, I won't go into all the rest. I'm just going to leave it there. Because you see, what I did, I made the mistake of going on for 30 or 60 seconds elaborating on that in all kinds of details. And there were some people who didn't like it and were rather vocal about it. And I got called in by the elders. But you see, that's what God has done for us. We've committed adultery. He's created us to enjoy Him, to worship Him, to find satisfaction in Him, and we've gone to the things of this world for it. But He's given His Son for us as an opportunity to take us back. You see, here's the thing. If we really, really get down to the nitty-gritty of God's love, it's repulsive to us. It's repulsive. We can't stand it. It makes us sick. Because if we look at that on a human level, what do? We end up calling the preacher in and raking him over the coals for it. You see, we find God's love repulsive if we really think about it. Because we just don't operate on that level. What's the point here? Here's the point. If God did the unthinkable, if God has loved us like that when we had rejected Him, when we had committed adultery against Him, when we had been His enemies, when we had turned our backs against Him, then how much more will He be committed to us now for those of us who are in a relationship with Him? For those of us who are able to say that we love Him. We are Christians. We're not perfect, but we are in a relationship with Him. Let's come back to the question in verse 31. If God is for us, then who can be against us? The point is that He's committed to us. That He's committed to us. He's committed to you. Verse 32, how will He not also along with Him graciously give us all things? We'll look at that on Sunday. How committed is He? What kind of a commitment does that mean? What does it mean that He will give us all things? Wait till Sunday. But for now, if God has loved us that much when we rejected Him, going after the broken cisterns of this world, then how much more will He be committed to us now? Let's say, for example, you spend $20,000 and you fly halfway around the world to adopt a child from Romania. You go through 2 years of preparing to get this child. You go through all the legal hassles and all the documents and you scrape together all the money you can and your life is basically put on hold for these 2 years. And then you fly halfway around the world to collect this little girl or little boy, and then you bring them home. And she or he grows up. And when they're old enough, they move out of home and they get a job, and it happens to be on the other side of Australia. But they worry that you will never come and visit them again. and you sit them down before they leave and you remind them of how much you went through to get them in the first place. If you did that for them then how much more will you be committed to them now? That's what the cross means. That's what Good Friday means. Or another example. I know two cases. People I know, one remotely, the other one personally. I know two cases where the son has killed the mother or the wife. Horrible situations, both in Christian circles. Now, what if you are in that situation and it's your son that has done that? And your son goes to prison. And you sell your house just to go and be near him so you can visit him every day. You sell everything to move next door to the prison so you can visit him. Your life now literally revolves around your son. And then the day comes when your son is set free. And he comes to you and he doubts now that you will be there for him. He wonders whether now you will let him down. And you sit him down and you say, "Son, don't you understand what I've done for you? Do you not understand the situation that you were in and everything I gave up? How much more now will I be committed to you?" It's exactly what God has done for us. We're entering into a time of communion. Just want to remind, you need 3 volunteers to come up the front to hand out the cup and the bread. But I've got one more illustration. And this comes from a former colleague of mine who preached a sermon one day and he finished with this illustration. Not sure if it's a true story or not, but the illustration is that it was a family going away on holiday, maybe just like Good Friday today, and on the way the car caught on fire. Engine blew up, caught on fire. The whole family gets out except the 8-year-old girl. And the dad goes back in to get the 8-year-old girl and gets her out safe and sound, hardly a scratch on her. He, however, suffers 3rd-degree burns over his body. Fast forward 8 years. The girl is now 16. She's wanting to live it up a little. And this party comes up. She's been asked to a party and the father won't let her go. And the girl starts to doubt that his dad really loves her, doubts his care for her, doubts his commitment to her. And for a week, there's just bitter arguments in the house between her and her dad. Just going off at him, saying he's so mean, so cruel. You say you love me, but you don't. And one day she just gets so sick of it and she bursts into his bedroom, opens the door, and there he is standing in a towel. He's just had a shower and he's got a towel around his waist. And she's about to give him an earful and he says, "What is it now?" And she sees the burn marks over his body. And she suddenly realizes what her dad has done for her. How committed her dad is. Here's the point of the cross. If God did not give up his own son for us while we were bowing down into these broken cisterns, turning his back on him, rejecting succulent water, cool water that would satisfy our thirst, and going after the sludge in the ground. If God did not spare his own son when we were in that position, now that we come here and are in a relationship with him, in communion with him, how much more will he be committed to you today? This is what communion is all about. This is what Good Friday is all about. This is what the cross is all about. Do you doubt God's commitment to you today? We'll explore this further on Sunday, but do you doubt God's commitment to you today? Do you doubt his love for you? Do you doubt that he will be there for you always? Go back to the cross. Go back to the cross.